confusion about what is meant by regressives. Essentially, we refer to liberals pejoratively as progressives. That, by default, makes us conservatives regressives. It implies someone who is resistant to change. And that term is apt, I suppose, seeing as how we, regressives, deny evolution. Throughout history, we, regressives, have been resistant to change, whether that change was freeing the slaves, or desegregation, or government regulation, or Social Security, health care, climate change, whatever. During the Revolutionary War, ironically, we wouldn't have been the Patriots, as is suggested in my bullshit book series, Rush Revere. To the contrary, we would have been the Tories, who were the conservatives of their day and were resistant to the progressive thinking of their fellow colonists. And speaking of my book series, my next book coming out soon is Rush Revere and the Draft Dodgers. The kids will really get a kick out of that one, and it will detail how patriots, such as myself and Ted Nugent, chickened out when it was our turn to do our patriotic duty and fight for this country during the Vietnam War. In my case, I sat out the war on my anal cyst. In the Nuge's case, he literally crapped his pants at the very thought of facing America's enemies. But I digress. We regressives were on the right side of the Civil War. We were fighting for the states' rights, that is, for the right of the states to keep their lazy slaves so that they could grow their economies. That is how the South was built, on the backs of lazy slaves. And then the feds had to come in and ruin everything. Uncle Sugar sticking his nose in where it didn't belong. If those lazy Negroes didn't appreciate their newfound freedom accorded to them by the Constitution, and if they had a problem with the working conditions, they shouldn't have come here in the first place. They should have just got back on the slave ships and returned to Africa. I've often wondered, as my friend Cliven Bundy once opined, if our Negroes of today aren't better off being kidnapped from their homes and sold off into slavery, husbands separated from their wives, children separated from their parents, forced to pick cotton 12 to 14 hours a day for nothing, brutally and sadistically flogged until their backs are lacerated and laid bare, limbs amputated for trying to run away, and their women routinely raped and brutalized by their white masters, and if any of them object to that kind of treatment, they get lynched. When comparing that to living on welfare, I can't help but wonder if our Negroes are better off as slaves. That is another children's book that I would like to write. Rush Revere and the Slave Owners. Give the kids another history lesson on how real Americans enslaved the subhuman mongrels and mistreated them, all in the name of capitalism. Folks, that is a shining example of American exceptionalism. We regressives were on the right side of civil rights. Every real American should be free to decide if they want subhuman mongrels living next door to them, going to the same schools, eating at the same restaurants, drinking from the same fountains, or being paid the same wages for the same work. Every state should decide if they want their white women marrying subhuman mongrels. Each state should be free to discriminate against subhuman mongrels because, well, they aren't really Americans. Hell, they aren't really human. That is why rugged individuals like the KKK stepped in to keep the subhuman mongrels in their place. But then again, Uncle Sugar stuck his nose in the state's business, and now they made everyone think that they are our equals, including the gays. Folks, we troglodytes, I mean regressives, are on the right side of just about every issue that I can think of today. In fact, I cannot think of a single issue on which we regressives are actually wrong. We regressives are right about everything all of the time, and the progressives are wrong about everything all of the time, even when they agree with us. That is why we cannot and must not compromise on anything. The liberals would say that our ideas are unsound, even outright dangerous. These communist socialists would say that we are delusional, that we are in denial, that we are in the head. They say we live in a bubble. But let's take a look at the record. We enacted our own jobs program in the Congress, but the Magic Negro refused to sign it. We offered our own alternative to Obamacare that would have covered every single American with a greater cost savings. The key word, of course, is every American. We had a plan to save Social Security and Medicare by getting rid of them. We want to supply fully automatic weapons, including the M249 saw, to every teacher and every college student as a way of countering the mass shootings. We have the most productive Congress on record. We want to quadruple the current budget to the VA because, in my mind, there is nothing more important than serving your country. Well, short of being a bombastic bag of wind on the radio, or being a half-assed, full of chicken hawk rocker. Folks, we need to regress back to when George W. Bush was president. Remember those good old days? You can't argue with success. Time and time again, we regressives have been proven right. We were right about trickle down. George Bush gave massive tax cuts to the rich, and the U.S. economy exploded and has enjoyed record growth ever since. Because W heeded the warning from the CIA, we regressives stopped Al Qaeda from taking down the World Trade Center and saved thousands of lives. We were right about abandoning Afghanistan and invading Iraq. There is much more oil in Iraq. We were greeted as liberators, remember? The Iraqi people loved us. We found the weapons of mass destruction and the nuclear device that Saddam Hussein was going to personally hand deliver to Osama bin Laden. Iraq is now the shining beacon of democracy in the Middle East. Was it not George W. who looked in Putin's eyes and got a sense of his soul? Was it not George W. and the regressives who personally assassinated bin Laden and stopped the financial collapse of our banking industry? Who's living in a bubble? Like I said, you can't argue with success.